everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of Koby's Brain. In this episode, we're going to count down my favorite Best Picture nominees from this year's Oscars. Which film does Koby's Brain think should have won the highest award at the ceremony? Find out soon. But first, give it up for our band, Ron Roach and the Alien Gang, and my brainless assistant, Koby's Body. Before we get into the countdown of what Koby's Brain's favorite Best Picture nominees from the Oscars were, we have a message from this episode's sponsor. You guessed it, I am still going to keep trying to sell you Koby's Brain non-fungible coins, even though no one f***ing wants them. Not only do people not want Koby's Brain non-fungible coins, people actively hate them. However, no one wants to advertise on this show, so we're going to keep trying to sell you these coins, which you can purchase at OpenSea.io/theKoby Company. Hopefully one day someone will want them. If no one wants them, I guess we'll have to make an OnlyFans for Koby's Body or something like that. That sounds like a more promising venture. Okay, so one final thing before we get started with the countdown. Koby's Brain now has an updated film and TV evaluation criteria. The ratings for film and TV here on Koby's Brain will now be broken into 5 parts: story, characters, visuals, sound, and epicness. So for story, that's assessed based on the coherence, engagement, suspense, and the themes of the story. Characters, that's the performance, identification, and likability of the characters. So that includes acting and then also how the characters were written themselves. Visuals include cinematography, VFX, mise-en-scène, so the production design, costumes, etc., and the colors. Sound includes score and sound design. And then epicness is kind of where my own personal bias gets factored into the equation. It's things that I specifically look for in my movies, such as goosebump and tear elicitation and the overall quality of my subjective viewing experience. I also factor in variables that I really like, such as cultural influence and significance and originality. So one could argue that epicness just invalidates my ratings entirely because it's a set of criteria that I like, but I don't know. I think it accounts for the personal bias. It's kind of the personal bias category that everyone has their own epicness category in their film and TV reviews. So epicness is mine. So let me know what you think of these evaluation criteria. Is there anything I'm missing here? If so, I would like to add it to ensure that my rating system is as objective as possible. Okay, now that we've covered that, we can now dive into Koby's Brain's 2022 Oscar Best Picture nominees countdown. In 10th place out of 10, we have West Side Story, directed by Steven Spielberg, which is on HBO Max and Disney+. West Side Story is the 2021 remake of a play about a tragic love story between disillusioned member of the white gang called the Jets, Tony, and sister of a member of the rival Puerto Rican gang called the Sharks, Maria. So the story score is obviously super high here, and that is because the story is a classic. It's a 20th century Romeo and Juliet, and the 1961 film that was also made about this play apparently won 10 out of 11 Oscars it was nominated for that year. Clearly a story for the ages. Additionally, the visuals and sound scored super high because, yeah, it's a really well-made film. The costumes were great, especially the contrast between the Jets, who were pretty much always in blue, and the Sharks, who were pretty much always in red. And the music was really good, too. Characters didn't score super high because I didn't really like Ansel Elgort's Tony. The man is out of control, and he can't control himself around his love interest, Maria, even though her brother wants him dead. And he can't control his anger enough to not murder his lover's brother. So he just needs to get it together. And it made it hard for me to really like this dude because, yeah, I didn't really relate to him. You know, these days, if your lover's brother wants you dead, I think it's time to move on. Honestly, you'll be able to find another lover. You know, he's a good looking dude, and I don't know. The other thing is, I get that he was fighting for for interracial love, but I don't know. These days, that's fine. Who's still getting upset about that these days? Really? People, it's fine at this point. Even bigots are probably fine with it for the most part. So I don't really think in 2022 it's much of a shield to die on. So these aspects of the film kind of had me rolling my eyes a little bit, making the movie not very epic. Ultimately, although it's a very impressive movie with a nice message of racial tolerance, which we liked here on Kobe's Brain, we love racial tolerance here on Kobe's Brain, I felt West Side Story's melodramatic depiction of romantic love seemed antiquated, making the movie feel nauseatingly corny. For these reasons, we gave the movie a 7.4 out of 10, which is just shy of a bronze Kobe coin for a wooden Kobe coin. Nonetheless, that is a super impressive, great movie. I don't fault anyone for nominating it for a Best Picture Oscar. In ninth place, we have Don't Look Up, directed by Adam McKay, which is on Netflix. So Don't Look Up is a satirical story about humanity's generally ignorant response to a scientist's discovery that Earth is soon going to be destroyed by an incoming comet. Characters scored really high because of how epic the star-studded cast, including Leonardo DiCaprio, Jennifer Lawrence, Jonah Hill, Timothée Chalamet, and Cate Blanchett, among a bunch of others, were. The hilarious cast and the conversations sparked by the movie are the reasons the epicness score is so high. However, the satire was a bit heavy-handed and not quite as funny as something similar like Doctor Strangelove, which negatively impacted the story score. And the prevalence of stock footage and B-movie VFX also kind of docked the visuals score a little bit. Ultimately, this movie wasn't perfect, but was entertaining and thought-provoking. It begs the question, are you looking up? I'd like to think I'm looking up, but often I think that even the most climate change aware among us still choose to not look up at times, unfortunately. So yeah, we really liked Don't Look Up here on Kobe's Brain and are giving it a 7.8 out of 10. That is a bronze Kobe coin. In eighth place, we have King Richard, directed by Ronaldo Marcus Green, which is on HBO Max. King Richard tells the story of Venus and Serena Williams' early rise to stardom through the eyes of their eccentric father, Richard Williams. Characters scored really high on this movie because, frankly, Will Smith killed it. The scene where he's crying, talking about about his decision to let Venus go pro, that might have been some of the best acting I've seen all year. Honestly, incredible. It'll bring a tear to your eyes. And considering how crazy he had to act to get into the mind of this kind of eccentric father character, the slap seems less surprising. But let's not get into that. It's not super relevant here. Or maybe I should if I want more people to watch this show. I don't know. I probably won't. Also, really loved the visual where Venus would throw a tennis ball in the air in slow motion and the ball would come down. And so the ball comes down and it like illustrates the passing of time. Super cool. Any future tennis movie should use that trick. It was really dope. Plus, in the tennis ball going on the court, boom, boom, boom. That part was really cool. So that visuals and sound design are pretty high because those were really cool. It did get docked in story a little bit though, because the story of Venus and Serena is epic enough. And I was kind of more curious about them rather than a story told about their father. That was cool, but I almost wonder if a Venus and Serena Williams biopic would have been a cooler story. I don't know. Plus, I also think sports movies in general are kind of predictable, right? It always ends with a big win or a big loss. If it's a big win, the win has to be the most epic thing ever, and if it's a big loss, then there's a big lesson. So yeah, sports movies, a little predictable, but this was a pretty good one. Ultimately, it was awesome to see this film about the formation of two real-life legends, and Will Smith's performance was truly incredible to watch. We loved King Richard on Kobe's Brain. We are giving it an 8.2 out of 10, a silver Kobe coin. In seventh place, we have Dune, directed by Denis Villeneuve, which is on HBO Max. Dune is the first movie in what is sure to be a massive franchise based off of American sci-fi author Frank Herbert's series of novels. Characters in Dune scored really high because, frankly, the cast is incredible. Timothée Chalamet, Oscar Isaac, Josh Brolin, Zendaya, Jason Momoa, Javier Bardem, etc. Amazing cast. Visuals and sound obviously super great too, considering they won 6 Oscars for these things. Best sound, Hans Zimmer's score, editing, production design, VFX, Greg Fraser's cinematography, all those things won Oscars. So obviously you got to hand it to them. You got to give credit where it's due. It's a well-made movie. It did get docked a little bit in story because the world building was so ambitious that details like the specifics of planet Caladan were kind of glossed over, and the epicness was docked because I expected it to be Lord of the Rings level epic based on the hype, and this was not the case, at least not in this movie. Ultimately, Dune was super well done, and if future movies can get me more interested and invested in the Dune universe, it could really be a really awesome franchise. We loved Dune here on Kobe's Brain, and we're giving it an 8.2 out of 10, a silver Kobe coin. In sixth place, we have The Power of the Dog, directed by Jane Campion, which is on Netflix. The Power of the Dog tells the story of a seemingly hypermasculine but deeply troubled cowboy and the complicated relationship he forms with his brother's new family. Power of the Dog is a really cool story, super suspenseful, super engaging, and that's really largely because of Benedict Cumberbatch's complex depiction of Phil Burbank. I also really loved the Western psychological thriller aesthetic, which kind of reminded me a little bit of No Country for Old Men. Although scores were good across the board, I think they would have been higher had there not been the sudden shift in Phil's character that makes him suddenly become super friendly to Rose's son Peter out of nowhere. And it was never explained, which really made the movie a little bit less epic. Ultimately, this movie is super engaging, super well done, and well worth the watch despite some lingering questions it might leave you with. We loved it here on Kobe's Brain and are giving it an 8.3 out of 10, a silver Kobe coin. In fifth place, we have Licorice Pizza, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. Licorice Pizza is a comedy about a precocious 15-year-old boy and his unlikely romance with a 25-year-old woman in 1970s LA. The characters are absolutely hilarious, super fun to watch, plus the sound, specifically the soundtrack and the visuals, created an epic goosebump eliciting nostalgia for youth. However, I'll be the first to admit there's not much of a story here. It's mostly an assortment of entertaining mini-stories. Plus, as I mentioned in my earlier review of the movie in a previous episode, that the actualization of Gary and Alana's romance felt unnecessary, if not weird. Ultimately, I loved this movie and the nostalgia for youth it brought to my heart, no matter how bizarre the statutory romance the movie is about was. We loved it here on Kobe's Brain and gave it an 8.5 out of 10. That is a silver Kobe coin for Licorice Pizza. In fourth place, we have Nightmare Alley, directed by Guillermo del Toro, which is on HBO Max. Nightmare Alley is a remake of the 1947 movie based on a 1946 book about a man with a dark past who joins a carnival, learns the secrets of being a mentalist, and abuses his newfound powers. This movie was great across the board. The rise and fall story of this crazy anti-hero played by Bradley Cooper, super engaging, super suspenseful. The neo-noir visuals along with the strange props like the baby Enoch in the jar were pretty cool too. I haven't seen the original though, and based on a lot of things I've read, the original may have been even better. I gotta see that at some point, but that should just show how this is just an awesome story. Ultimately, although it was a remake, if you haven't heard the story in Nightmare Alley before, it will definitely blow your mind. I didn't know what a carnival geek show was before, and it's apparently these alcoholics or drug addicts who the carnival kind of pays with alcohol or drugs so that they'll chase chickens and bite their heads off. And it's crazy. It's like, how does a person end up so down and out that they'll resort to such a career? And find out in this movie. We really loved Nightmare Alley here on Kobe's Brain. We gave it an 8.7 out of 10. That is a high-end silver Kobe coin. In third place, we have Drive My Car, directed by Ryusuke Hamaguchi, which is on HBO Max. Drive My Car is a Japanese film about a theater director directing a performance of Uncle Vanya, which is a play, who develops a bond with his driver over their shared grief and regret. This movie is extremely powerful and moving. It'll get you thinking about the inevitability and difficulty of human suffering. Near the end, an actor performs a monologue from Uncle Vanya, which really just nails the struggles of the protagonist throughout the film, and the struggles in many of our own lives. And it was so epic, I just have to read part of it here, so forgive me. We'll live through the long, long days and through the long nights. We'll patiently endure the trials that fate sends our way, even if we can't rest. We'll continue to work for others, both now and when we have grown old. And when our last hour comes, we'll go quietly, and in the great beyond, we'll say to him that we suffered, that we cried, that life was hard, and God will have pity on us. Then you and I will see the bright, wonderful, dreamlike life before our eyes. We shall rejoice, and with tender smiles on our faces, we'll look back on our current sorrow, and then at last, we shall rest. So this idea of human suffering and how we can endure it has been a major source of contemplation for Coby on the thought side of things, and this movie discusses it beautifully. Another really powerful moment in the movie was a scene where the camera really stays fixed on the dude who you could totally argue was the bad guy in the movie because he slept with the protagonist's wife, but we're just locked on him, and he's giving this impassioned performance about his own suffering, and we can't help but feel enormous pity. It's just like kind of a profound, empathetic moment. And also, the driver, Misaki's performance, wow, incredible, really, really good. So the visuals were minimalist, but beautiful and crisp, and the frequent use of silence in the sound design made for some epic moments. It did get docked slightly, though, because it could have easily omitted the first 45 minutes of the movie, in my opinion. But that's just me. Ultimately, this movie is incredibly moving, and if you're in a setting where you can sit still for 3 hours and connect with the characters' struggles, it'll blow your mind and likely bring you some tears. We loved it here on Kobe's Brain. We gave it an 8.8 out of 10. That is a very high-end silver Kobe coin for Drive My Car. In second place, we have Belfast, directed by Kenneth Branagh. Belfast is a story about a family debating leaving their hometown of Belfast, Northern Ireland, in the backdrop of Protestant Catholic violence taking place in 1969. The movie is really funny, and the performances are really great, especially from the young Buddy and his mother. The black and white visuals with occasional bursts of color during moments, like when movies are playing, were very beautiful. The movie really makes you feel for people who have to leave their hometowns. The family in the movie, they love Belfast because their friends, their family, their memories, they're all there. And the love that they feel for their hometown is something that anyone who has ever left their hometown can probably relate to. And having to leave because of violence is something that I really couldn't empathize with until watching this movie. But it's something that's obviously super relevant now, like thinking about what's going on in Ukraine. It's really sad. And this movie will really help you empathize with this very sad situation that so many people throughout history and even today have to go through. Ultimately, this movie is really funny, and its message about love for one's hometown is pretty universal, and it's really touching, as is its message of religious tolerance. We loved it here on Kobe's Brain and gave it an 8.8 out of 10, another high-end silver Kobe coin. And in first place, Koda, which is directed by Sian Heder and is on Apple TV+. Koda tells the story of a hearing child of deaf parents who decides she wants to be a singer. Holy I don't know the last movie I saw that was as touching as this one was, or that managed to bring me so many tears. The performances of the Rossi family and the love they seem to have on screen is like probably what did it, honestly. I really liked the sound design as well. I knew there was going to be a moment where they cut the sound and put us in the POV of the deaf parents, and when they finally do it, it's during the daughter's recital, and it's so epic. It's so moving to have done it at that moment. One could certainly argue that this is kind of a glorified Disney Channel family movie where the child wants to do something that the parents don't initially accept, but eventually do when they realize the child is good at it and that it makes them happy. Yes, this is that, but the stakes seem so much higher because the child also must be the interpreter for the parents. So it's a little bit more complicated than that. Ultimately, although the movie seems to follow a Disney Channel family movie formula, the amazing performances and the nuances of the story make Koda one of the most emotionally poignant movies I've seen in a very long time. To say we loved it here on Kobe's Brain is a major understatement. We gave it a 9 out of 10, a coveted golden Kobe coin for Koda. This means that, yes, we did agree with the Academy. Koda was the number one of the Best Picture nominees for 2022, according to Kobe's Brain. In conclusion, people might care less about the Oscars these days, but holy there were a lot of incredible movies made this year, which is honestly pretty exciting because it just goes to show that movie making is just continuing to get better and better as the years go by, and humanity just does it more and more and more. However, I gotta say, my highest rated movie of 2021 remains Spider-Man No Way Home, which barely edged out Koda with its 9.1 out of 10. This brings up an interesting point. Am I just an ignorant, unrefined piece of with no understanding of what real art is? Or are critics a little too quick to dismiss Marvel movies just because they're Marvel movies? The answer likely lies somewhere in the middle. So if you want some of the Kobe coins that were created during this episode, be sure to buy them. Or more likely, don't do it because you're probably not going to anyways, and they're probably a scam. Anyways, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Kobe's Brain. We'll see you next time.